thank Jim Walton and thank Mike Malone and others who supported the idea of trying to bring Ross Devol here to be the first fellow of the Walton Family Foundation originally. And he had this idea of building it out, this Heartland Forward, this think and do tank, and be able to help the Heartland understand and drive policy for how we can build robust economies among the Heartland. And we're the beneficiary of that. Ross being headquartered here in Bentonville, and he's spent a lot of time with a very intellectually curious human being, Mike Milken, and Mike Milken at the Milken Institute, and did all kinds of incredible research during that period. He's already helped us. As an example, he did the research to help us understand what we were leaving on the table relative to the healthcare. You know, I think it's $1 billion number or something. You know, that we were leaving on the table because we didn't have certain specializations that we needed to be able to import, versus we were going outside to get a lot of those things. And so those are the kind of things that he's impacting among others. And he's going to highlight his organization and then go into some specific research. We'll just get a small taste of what Ross is capable of delivering, but we're looking forward to what he's going to present today. And Ross has been a good friend. He helps accelerate Arkansas a whole lot. Jerry Adams is on the call. Jerry and I spent a lot of time together around that issue and got to hopefully advance the state early on. And grateful for your work there, Jerry. And Jerry's on the board of ACHI also. And Ross, with that introduction, please take it away. We're sure glad you're in Bentonville and operating here.
Well, Tim, I appreciate that kind introduction, and myself, my wife and family are glad to be here. And we're not on complete lockdown in the state of California, in Los Angeles, where we otherwise would be on complete lockdown. So it's a real pleasure to interact with you today. And Caitlin, if you could you pull up my slides? So let me just give you a little bit about Heartland Forward's mission. It's really to improve economic performance in the center of the country. That's 20 states. It's from Michigan, south to Alabama, west to Texas, and north to North Dakota. So it's a big heartland. It is the third largest economy in the world if it were a separate country. And we really launched our website just last October. What I want to do today is spend some time on a just released study on the importance of entrepreneurship, and also show Arkansas's economic performance during COVID-19 using some weekly data. And then also, what are the keys to post-COVID-19 economic recovery? I mean, my message in short is really, we need to get entrepreneurs and the young firms they create out of intensive care to put the Arkansas economy back on the road to recovery, and be intentional about developing a strategy for recovery. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit about who is Heartland Forward. I'll spend a great deal of the time on the importance of young firms in determining regional job creation, a major study that we just did here recently. And then I'll spend some time talking about how Arkansas has performed during COVID-19 relative to the nation, the heartland, and then non-heartland states. And then what are really the keys to post-COVID economic recovery in Northwest Arkansas in particular. Next slide, please. So this shows you our mission. National research and policy discussions often overlook the heartland, especially at smaller cities and rural areas. And additionally, most think tanks in the heartland focus only on their state or their metropolitan area instead of looking at the heartland as a whole. To solve the region's challenges, we need to develop a more holistic view, and this is really the void that Heartland Forward is trying to fill. When members of the Walton family approached me about the idea of starting what became Heartland Forward, my answer was yes. Next slide, please. So we call ourselves both a think and a do tank because we actively work to put our research into action by developing policy solutions, building community, and collaborating with partners to maximize impact. So think tanks do a lot of research, but don't necessarily follow through on the policy recommendations. And my background at the Milken Institute was well suited to what the Waltons were looking for here. And so it was really a unique opportunity. Now, we aim to produce high quality research to improve economic and health outcomes in heartland communities. And prior to COVID-19, not that many economists in the mainstream understood the link between economic performance and health, but they are closely linked, as Joe mentioned earlier. We also aim to work directly with heartland policymakers to implement success pathways that we discover through our research. And we evaluate those potential collaborations with partners, devote our resources and attention to critical questions where we believe we can have the biggest impact. Next slide, please. These are our 4 program areas. We conduct research analyzing factors affecting US states, metropolitan areas, micropolitans, and rural areas. The first area of our programs are regional competitiveness. We're looking at explaining policies and how factors affect regional economic prosperity and compare our region to other regions on these factors. We're trying to provide recommendations, so whether it comes to state tax policy, different cost of doing business measures. One thing we focused on very early is our second program, innovation and entrepreneurship. This is where a lot of my previous work has resided. So explaining why entrepreneurship is important to regional economic prosperity, to provide policymakers with an understanding of the policies and structural tools, universities, federal labs, that are available to boost entrepreneurial activity. And our third area is building human capital. So guiding policymakers in efforts to boost workforce educational attainment and to ensure workforce skills match employer needs. And the last major area, the fourth one, is what we call health risks and disparities, identifying the relationship between socioeconomic characteristics and public health issues, and assist in developing effective policy for directing the Heartland's public health disparities. And unfortunately, we have a number of them. One of the major ones being obesity and all the chronic conditions related to it. Next slide, please. So briefly on our 5 major research goals, we try to gain insights from our research and develop research on timely issues that we believe are affecting the Heartland's economy and its communities. And we regularly produce indices and rankings that report on various economic and development factors across the Heartland, but also comparing it to the entire country, because we believe that you can't really understand your position and how to correct it unless you're benchmarking yourself against the best in class. And so we build on the senior staff's research experience, strong partnerships, data, and economic theory to develop innovative but implementable economic and policy solutions to stakeholders. And we provide our peers and supporters with research content relative to their organizations, facilitate convenings such as the Heartland Summit, which unfortunately we had to postpone this year because of COVID-19, but we're hoping to have it next April, and partnering for those events. And we evaluate potential collaborations to develop partnerships, once again, to maximize our impact. Next slide, please. So just a bit of some of our previous work, our most dynamic micropolitans and metropolitans, where we benchmark Heartland communities' performance against all communities across the country. And we're going to be updating those in the fall. In fact, the most dynamic micropolitans has been completed. It's under layout right now. We've done a number of other things, various webinars with the Conference Board, with the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, and many others. We've also looked at trying to amplify or bridging the rural divide in terms of 5G policy. We're going to be doing more on that. We've looked at initially the impacts of Chinese retaliatory tariffs on US crops and how that would affect the Heartland. And then looking at how a Chinese slowdown would affect the Heartland trucking industry. And recently we've done some analysis of the paycheck protection loans, seeing if minority entrepreneurs and other businesses have been receiving kind of an equitable share of those. Next slide, please. So these are some of our major reports that we've released over just the past few months. One is Millennials and Finding New Hope in the Heartland. And we find that millennials are remaining and returning to the Heartland in greater numbers, drawn by the lower cost of living and the growing opportunities for high-tech jobs here in the Heartland. And we believe that COVID-19 will only amplify that impact. One factor is really not economic, it's more social in nature, in the sense that millennials feel they're more culturally connected in the Heartland, and they can enter civic engagement at an earlier stage in their careers. Another study that we just completed a little over a month ago was, does geography determine destiny? And we partnered with Roz Chetty at Opportunity Insights. He's at Harvard University. And it looks at the significant decline we've seen in generational economic mobility over the past few decades. And an individual's opportunity for upward mobility varies widely based on where they grew up, what zip code. Since 1940, the likelihood that children will grow up to achieve a higher standard of living than that of their parents has fallen from 90% to 50%. So to put it another way, the increasing number of today's children will not grow up to be better off than their parents were. And the report illustrates that a wide variety of complex factors impact individuals' likelihood of upward mobility, including race, unfortunately, social circumstances, teen birth rates, access to capital, and higher education. And now let me spend a bit more time discussing the recent study, Young Firms and Regional Economic Growth. Next slide, please. So young firms are defined as new business entities that are 5 years of age or less. And these are distinct from young establishments, such as a new Burger King, which are new locations of an existing firm. And young firms have a key role in economic growth across the country. For example, in 2016, startups created roughly 2.6 million jobs in the United States. For comparison, firms of all other ages lost 267,000 jobs on net. So job creation, less job destruction. And that's an important statistic because most economic development officials don't realize this. This graph illustrates how young firms' employment has declined in recent decades. And I believe this trend explains a lot of the lost dynamicism of the US economy overall. So following moderate stability in the 1990s, the US saw a notable decrease in the share of employment at young firms that lasted roughly 15 years. And today, approximately 1/3 fewer workers hold jobs at young firms than they did in the year 2000. Now, the reason for this decline can be debated. It could be the result of phenomenon ranging from societal changes in the perception towards entrepreneurship to increased student loan debt, making it harder for younger people to finance starting new companies, to larger firms being more dominant in their industries for longer, such in the technology sector. You see less new entrants there. But it's really the rapid growth of a relatively number of young firms, what I refer to them being knowledge intensive, that are responsible for long enduring job creation. Next slide, please. So the young firm share of employment, I believe, is a useful measure of the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem. Some entrepreneurs aim to exploit local market demand and indirectly provides employment and income for the founders and their family members. Many refer to this as Main Street entrepreneurship. Nevertheless, service sector, family-based entrepreneurship employ both a sizable number of family and non-family members. The percentage of total employees at young firms with a bachelor's degree or above can provide a measure of the sophistication, or what I refer to as the knowledge intensity of a firm. And the young firm knowledge intensity supplies information on the aspirations of the founders and the characteristics of the industry in which they are engaged. So research universities, government labs are central to a knowledge-based entrepreneurial ecosystem, and both are key ingredients for the formation of these new knowledge-intensive firms in the entrepreneurial ecosystems that commercializes research in the form of spin-outs and through a licensing to established firms. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of detailed quantitative analysis through this. I'm going to spare you the gory details. That's largely in the appendix of our study, but just hit on what does it really mean for economic development officials and policy leaders. For metropolitan areas, the relationship between the young firm share of total private sector employment and employment growth shows that for every 1 percentage point increase in the share of total employment at young firms, so if it increased, say, from 9% to 10%, we would expect job growth over the period from 2010 to 2017 to be roughly 0.5 percentage point higher. Given that the young firm employment share has a standard deviation of about 3.5%, and the average job growth over the period from 2010 to 2017 was 12.6%, a half percentage point increase is sizable. For example, if a metro had an average job growth over the period of 2010 to 2017, we would expect a 1 standard deviation increase in the young firm employment share to result in a 15% faster growth rate. Now, this figure demonstrates the impact of a 10 percentage point increase in the young firm employment share. So if it went from 10% to 20% as a measure of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, this is how much higher potential job growth would be. So the message here is grow your own firms. They're less likely to leave. Next slide, please. So one additional point is on the knowledge intensity. So the estimated relationship between knowledge intensity and job growth is a 1 percentage point increase in the young firm knowledge intensity. So the percent of the employment at young firms with a bachelor's degree or above leads to roughly 1 percentage point boost in future job growth. So the standard deviation is just around 5 percentage points on that measure. And given that the average job growth was about 17% at the metro level over this 2010 to 2017 time period, you would expect to have a 34% faster job growth if you simply had 1 standard deviation increase in the knowledge intensity of a young firm. Now, this slide shows you a 10 percentage point increase in the young firm knowledge intensity. So if you went from 20% of employees at young firms having a bachelor's degree or above to 30%, it shows how much potential job growth could be boosted. In other words, if you could do that, you could double your job growth. I mean, think about that. That's just tremendous. And trust me, economic development officials across the country don't fully understand that. Well, next slide, please, sorry. As anyone who's seen any of my presentations, you can't have a presentation without a map embedded in them. This one's hard to read, but let me kind of explain it to you. So we created an overall measure of the entrepreneurial ecosystems based on those 2 measures I just showed you. Green is good and red is bad. And you'll see a lot of green there in California, the mountain states, Florida, the Southeast, and kind of in the Northeast. And unfortunately, a lot of red dots in the Heartland. The Heartland only has 5 of the top 50 metros in that overall young firm index, while claiming 30 of the bottom 50 positions on it. I mean, there are a number of causes for subpar growth beyond just entrepreneurial activities, but there is no other single factor that can claim a higher explanatory power of why the Heartland lags in job growth. And I believe, and there's evidence to support this, that part of this is kind of a legacy associated with the mass production era that inhibits or lowers the extent of entrepreneurial culture in many of these communities. Most of the support services are tied to large firms, and I think we need a renewed emphasis on self-determination by focusing more on building entrepreneurial awareness and capacity that must be a part of future economic development efforts, not only here in Arkansas, but throughout the heartland. We, in my opinion, have a misallocation of development resources, especially in incentives directed towards recruiting firms from other areas. So providing assistance and support services for budding entrepreneurs allows them the opportunity to scale up their firms and create jobs. And we need a more balanced kind of portfolio approach that includes recruiting, retention, and entrepreneurial support for the heartland and beyond. An organic entrepreneurial-based economic development requires a patient, long-term focused approach. So let me just touch a few moments on building entrepreneurial ecosystems. What can be done? And we have a number of them in the study. One of them is we need to honestly create more positive attitudes towards entrepreneurs. That we just need to emphasize it more in most of these heartland communities. Entrepreneurs are not typically held as high esteem as corporate managers in many heartland communities. We need to establish and provide more resources to entrepreneurial support organizations, whether you call them networks, connectors, enablers. We need to create the social capital that's required for success. And one of those key factors is kind of the secret sauce is enabling deal makers. Deal makers are individuals with valuable social capital that can facilitate relationships that build new firm formation. They can be financial in terms of providing the connections to financial resources, but also just connecting entrepreneurs and connecting them to the support services that they need. Very important.
Yes.
We still need this hard infrastructure. Is still necessary. Physical spaces such as incubators, accelerators, could kind of ease this process of starting new firms and scaling them up. Too few communities fully comprehend the importance of STEM entrepreneurship in terms of the quality of jobs they've created in retaining those graduates in their communities. And many of you have heard me, some would say harp on this before, but let me do it again. Universities need to offer more entrepreneurial education as part of their curriculum and provide commercialization program support for their students and faculty. Communities must insist that universities see entrepreneurship as a key component of their mission. Next slide, please. And an active effort focusing on encouraging business angel investors to provide the startup capital and smart money needs to occur, especially because angels want to invest locally. So there's a number of things that I think the public sector can do to encourage these angel networks. The government actually can play an effective role as part of the entrepreneurial infrastructure, since they are already part of the startup process by issuing permits, registrations, and licensing. They can be a central hub to facilitate resources rather than be an impediment. And corporate engagement is critical to success in these entrepreneurial ecosystems. Corporations might create spinoffs, and many do. This is the success story of Silicon Valley and these other high-tech clusters, by spinning out new firms that simply are not part of their business model, but they can start new organizations. And there's a growing body of research, and my colleague Richard Florida, who's a senior fellow at Heartland Forward, has done a lot of research on the role of the quality of place, the arts and culture, and producing what I call prosperity of place. And the presence of arts improves the image of a region and assists in making a stronger case for attraction and fostering these denser entrepreneurial ecosystems. Next slide, please. And one more slide. Yeah, there we go. I wanted to just take a few moments to focus on how Arkansas has done in the COVID-19 area in terms of tracking our performance relative to other states and locations throughout the Heartland and non-Heartland area. We've been tracking insured unemployment rate, the initial unemployment insurance claims, and uninsurance cumulative claims since the pandemic began, basically kind of in mid-March. And since, as Joe showed earlier, COVID-19 cases and death rates in Arkansas on a per capita basis have remained low relative to others and did not force us to voluntarily shut our economy down as others have had to. Arkansas's peak insured unemployment rate on this chart occurred on the week of ending May 2nd at 10.2%. That was more than 5 percentage points below the national average, and that is this green line. And last week's claims brought the insured unemployment rate in Arkansas down to 3.4 percentage points. So we are getting back closer to normal here in Arkansas. Next slide, please.
Great news.
To put the initial claims, Tim, in perspective, we calculated the share of February 2020 private sector employment that have filed initial claims to date. So this looks at kind of the sum of weekly unemployment insurance claims since March 7th, the pre-COVID-19 pandemic period. And states with the largest shares of their workforces seeking unemployment benefits typically have had large kind of durable goods manufacturing, retail trade, and accommodations and food service, largely dependent upon tourism industries. In Arkansas, cumulative claims have been about 5 percentage points, again, below the national average. In Arkansas is that green bar you will see on the upper hand left. Next slide, please. So I wanted to conclude with kind of our 7 keys to post-COVID economic recovery here in Northwest Arkansas in particular. We're going to be releasing a major report in early October that kind of pinpoints some strategies for economic recovery for Northwest Arkansas. Let me just say this, kind of the COVID-19 crisis is a great tragedy, but out of great tragedies come great opportunities. And there's been no shortage of predictions about how this will change the economic landscape. But human civilization has survived these pandemics in the past. We will do so again. We believe that COVID-19 will create significant disruptions, but not so much abruptly in the ways, but we see it in the ways that will accelerate the changes that were already underway in society. It will pull them forward. And it's really now up to places to respond to these challenges and seize on these opportunities, because not all regions will be set back. We believe that places like Northwest Arkansas will do particularly well as people were already fleeing the coast prior to COVID-19, and there's already signs that that process will accelerate. So let me just touch upon some of our major recommendations, and here you're getting a very early stage advance notice on this. We have a whole series of strategies behind this, but one, Northwest Arkansas needs to become kind of the nation's best medium-sized metro for talent. That's creating more talent here and attracting it from other places, and really what I would call a remote worker program, a whole series of recommendations behind that. And we have to understand, as I said earlier, that we need to become one of the best places for the arts, culture, and recreation. I think we already are, but we need to double down on some of those investments, whether it's more inclusion on the bike trails in some of those communities, and just a whole series of investments in culinary arts and other areas. And we need to grow the economy and jobs around those big company anchors. We need to fill in some of those gaps that are present, and really, in some sense, have kind of an industrial commons in supply chain, delivery, and logistics, combining the strengths of the skill sets that we have here while supporting more of those early stage firms. Another area is bolstering the region's small business and startup ecosystems. And we have a number of recommendations in the report on that, trying to get access to capital to minority entrepreneurs in particular, supporting entrepreneurship at the university level, and those support organizations for those young firms. And then we have to be intentional about making inclusion and diversity a regional priority. A lot of recommendations in the study around that. And then also, as Tim mentioned earlier, I've been working with many people here in the healthcare entrepreneurial ecosystem. And one of those recommendations was we need additional specialized care services here and a new medical school. We will have a new medical school here in Northwest Arkansas. There'll shortly be an announcement on the structure of that, and there will be additional specialized services. Lastly, we need to rebrand and market the region. Northwest Arkansas really was a brand that brought all the communities here together, but the region, in our opinion, is deserving of a new moniker. And I know the Northwest Arkansas Council has been working on this. We have a number of recommendations on how we might do that, but we need to rebrand and market the region externally. In my opinion, people that live here in Northwest Arkansas and across the state tend to be too modest about all the changes that are taking place here, and we need a concerted strategy. And so we're going to be working with others to see that this strategy and recommendations are actually implemented. So I appreciate the time that you afforded me today, and please go to our website, heartlandforward.org, to register for regular updates and get on our distribution list. And I thank you for your time and glad to entertain any discussion and questions now. And Tim, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Ross, well, those are not two great presentations from Joe. Now Ross, that was some of the most interesting economic discussions we've had, you know, across the boards. And Ross, you're coming into your own. You really are going to do a lot more than you are thinking do, Tank, and I can feel your leadership, and it's going to be important to us. And I hope you'll continue to press on the way you are, because you can make a real impact in the Heartland. There's no doubt in my mind. Questions for everybody? From anybody?
Tim, this is Jerry Adams. Can you hear me?
You bet, Jerry.
I just want to acknowledge Ross's historic contribution to a lot of our thinking. You know, you mentioned Accelerate Arkansas, and I think this insight is brilliant. I think some of us have a geography different than Northwest Arkansas, but I think what Ross is talking about is very relevant for anybody in the Heartland to make this assessment of whatever their geography is. Because, you know, this issue about new talent or bringing new people in, I don't know. I mean, it starts with a lot of thinking that's being done right now in early brain development, in terms of early childhood education, early STEM training, and so on. So I can't wait to read some of the new work that's coming out, but it goes back to fundamentals. I think a lot of people in Arkansas are jealous of two counties in Northwest Arkansas, but a lot of us work in other areas outside of that. And all of what he's saying is relevant on any geography you're on. So I think he's a real gift to Arkansas, a real gift to the Heartland, and I admire his leadership and work.
Yes, and just to add to that, Jerry, one of the things that Ross helped us understand was when we create a tech job, a higher wage job categorically, we have the ability to increase our per capita income. And matter of fact, that's, I think, 75% of all the growth in per capita income has come from a certain set of tech NICS codes. As both Bill and I had a conversation about that yesterday morning. And what does that mean to all of us? One thing it means is increase in your home equity, in your homes. And, you know, as Keith Mayo, my former number 2, who now is like the third ranking person at Zions Bancorp, $70 billion bank, they did an analysis that says that your average home price will equal 3 times your household income. So as incomes go up, and incomes have been going up in this region quite a bit, and therefore the houses are going up, you know, more affordable, you have more income to be able to pay for them. So all of you, when you take out your home equity loans or sell your home for a big number, a lot of that comes from the underlying income in the region going up. And Jerry, thanks for bringing up all of Arkansas too. We want to always be sensitive to all of Arkansas. We get kind of focused on on where we're sitting, but
well, I think,
that matters. So thanks
yeah,
for bringing that forward.
I think one important thing is that most people in the Heartland have chosen place. I mean, I'm not going anywhere, and I think a lot of people have chosen place, but along with that comes a legacy of some of this, big corporate comfort. My years at Axiom, I was always surprised that we didn't spin out more startups. And even, our conversation with Chancellor Joe Steinmetz. Joe used to be at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Well, he said the aggressiveness of the research leadership at Ohio State is markedly different than the aggressiveness of the research leadership at the University of Arkansas. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but what you have is almost an attitude, and I think Ross is right. We've got to get people early on understanding that they can make a difference without being in a major corporate setting. And it is just a societal issue. I think it's just, we've got to get people lit up earlier in the process. And, the great comfort about being in a big company is great. And you can do some exciting things, but it also has a little big brotherness about it, that the big brother is going to take care of you. And the reality is it's a competitive world. And we've got to get people excited about their impact on their future at an earlier date.
Going to the university, Ross, you might comment if you can. The Walton Family Foundation made a pretty good grant to the university, and a lot of that has to do with a certain type of hire. I think they're looking at a certain type of leadership. I think
it's very exciting. It's a very exciting trigger for sure.
Yeah. Ross,
let me comment a little bit on that, Tim. And Jerry, I appreciate your comments. They're spot on. One of the things that members of the Walton family asked me to do when I first came into Arkansas, what is now 3 years ago,
wow,
was to take a look at what strategic investments could be made to improve the research capacity, efficiency, capabilities at the University of Arkansas, and to improve the commercialization rates, whether it's through startups, licensing to existing firms. And so I've been working with members of the ecosystem here and throughout the state for that matter. I think you'll see more activity that takes place there. But a couple of months ago, we announced a $200 million grant to the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, it's really, in my opinion, a game changing, because it's probably the first time I've truly had an opportunity to have a clinical laboratory to try out many of my ideas where they can actually be implemented. So you're going to see, and working with Joe Steinmetz, of course, there's a connection there, serendipity largely. Joe Steinmetz and I went to graduate school together at Ohio University a few years ago. So not that we were close friends back then, but anyhow, so there was some commonality, and we both had similar vision. The good news is he's a leader that's willing to implement it and kind of quarterback the process. So there's going to be a new, what I call I-Cubed Institute, that's going to be based on collaborative research. There's going to be an executive director that's going to head that, who has a lot of private sector experience. We have a nationwide search underway right now. There'll be someone recruitment underway on this as well. A national search, a great opportunity for someone to be the new Vice Chancellor for Economic Development at the University of Arkansas, that'll kind of lead this overall effort in working with the private sector. And I think one of the most interesting things about this will be, there are going to be places for the private sector firms to engage on campus, and not just in their own kind of buildings, but actually in this kind of interactive, innovative network that I think, if you look at the data, this is the way that most advances occur today, especially those that are commercializable, is through this interactive research and feedback. And the earlier you can have private sector firms involved in providing that feedback, you want to fail fast, not later. So if you're going to fail, you want to fail early and not late. And so they can many times tell you, well, that may be a really great academic aspiration, but probably doesn't have much applicability in the world of business. And so they can tell you that. And maybe you want to continue that research, but at least you know the probability of commercialization success is fairly low, and you want to know that earlier. So it is a huge opportunity for the university. But my call out is this. We have the university's attention now at the leadership level. We need to bring in the right people throughout the system to implement it. But it requires a focus by industry to get involved, and it's their responsibility to do so. Don't just rely upon the university to come and see you. Go knocking on their doors. Demand to know what's going on. So those are some of my words of wisdom.
Those are good ones. Those are good ones. I think Dan Sanker would agree with that. Wouldn't you, Dan? Dan gets over there a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably room for some discussion. I've got, like a lot of you guys have kids, I got a 16 and 17-year-old, and sometimes it looks a little bit, even when you listen to this or anything else, or the news, like we left them a dumpster fire from an economic standpoint, a political standpoint, a healthcare standpoint, a social standpoint, disparity in incomes and lifestyle standpoint, like everything. I don't know if that's always been like that, but it seems like there's some room to have some kind of discussion with the next generation, which is the Gen Z people. Tim and I have been bouncing some ideas around a little bit about why maybe that's not the case. Like, what are the green sprouts in the story? Like, is there anything we did right? Like, is there anything good that could possibly come from how we handled COVID, how the economy, is changing, or any of this stuff? It would be kind of interesting to find what's positive. It's kind of hard for, we're all kind of bummed out, but we're used to it. If you're in that Gen Z group, which is actually entering the workforce, so like 24-year-old, I think, on the late end, it looks a little like we weren't too good stewards of the whole thing. So maybe there's a way to address separately, what is the stuff we think we might have done right? Just an idea.
Yeah, all good observations, Dan. I don't pretend to have all the answers. But, I think one thing that we learned coming out of this is we truly are all interconnected around the world. We have, if anything, positive that comes out of the recent riots, protests that we've seen around and kind of injustice. It's that I think a lot of those changes were already underway. I think it'll accelerate them and pull them forward. We're going to have to deal with, there still is racial discrimination that occurs in America. Most of it is unknown by people who express those views. But amongst young people, I see a sense of optimism. And I think as soon as we have a vaccine that's approved by the FDA, even if it's not distributed, I think we're going to see some renewed optimism as we come out of this. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be hunky-dory, but we need to focus in the schools, as Jerry said, for those students that have the aptitude towards STEM, getting to them earlier, and especially among women and minorities.
Yes.
If you don't get to a child by the time they're in the 4th grade, maybe 5th grade, and turn them on to STEM, the probabilities that they'll ever get turned on are minor. And we also need to instill a sense of you can build your own organizations at an earlier stage to those people. So if you talk to a lot of these Gen Z, and my kids are there, they have, I think, much more optimism than we see in the national media.
Yeah, that's, Dan, you would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think they feel, if anything, maybe that's one of the positives, is that they've lost trust in the greater system. So maybe they'll use their entrepreneurial, something to pull themselves out of that. That might be good for everybody.
Yeah, and we'll do our little project. We'll report back to everybody, right, Dan? On that.
Yep. Sounds great.
Together and getting into their heads, letting them talk and be exposed to some other more, older age leaders. Is the broad brush there. Any
People
other
with
questions?
experience.
Yeah, there you go. Any other questions or comments? I'll tell you what, this conversation gives me goosebumps almost. Ross, you're right on. I just love your mind and how you're thinking about things, and I hope everybody will look at the rerun of this, because there's a lot of meat there, and that, of course, his website has got a lot of research reports. You got to kind of work at it to find them and those kind of things, but because there's a lot of information there. But anything we can do to help get that conveyed to people, we're a big champion. Keaton, you got a question or comment? I see Keaton.
Time for a final question?
You bet. Always.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ross, for the presentation. Again, echo that how grateful I know we all are to have you focused on Northwest Arkansas and throughout the Heartland, and joining us physically in our community as well. So thank you. Tim mentioned home equity, and which brings up the topic of housing and more broadly sort of community planning, urban planning. And I'm a little bit biased. I'm a commercial banker that chairs the board of a nonprofit housing developer that's both building mixed income homeownership projects, but also working to move the regional housing strategy forward with the council. And so I'm prone to seeing things through that lens anyway. But as I look at some of the priorities, talent retention, if we can move folks to home ownership more quickly, they become more rooted. We're talking about creative collisions, and to me, that speaks to the way we design our communities and neighborhoods and transportation systems to facilitate that interaction and creation of social capital. Certainly diversity and equity and inclusion. There's a huge portion of the racial wealth gap is explained by homeownership rates and housing inequities. And then health. We're seeing so many hospital systems realizing that some of their best bang for their buck is to build housing because of the stability it provides, and maybe it reduces the delay in seeking care that creates larger problems down the road. And so I'm just wondering, you touched on it a little bit in terms of real estate service delivery models, but I'm just curious if housing, urban planning, transportation, some of those interrelated land use issues has come up as potentially a structural issue that could address a number of these priorities.
It's a great question, and indeed the housing topic has come up repeatedly in terms of, we see it as kind of in both inclusion and diversity. So as Tim mentioned, typically housing prices relative to incomes are around 3 to 1. On the coast, where I used to live, it's 9 to 1, right?
Yeah.
Unless you inherit a fortune or a house, you simply cannot afford to buy one. So it's a comparative advantage for us relative to those high-tech entrepreneurial ecosystems. But within Northwest Arkansas, this is one of the negative repercussions that comes from economic success. Housing prices get driven up. And amongst workforce, your workforce segment of the population, housing begins to be, expensive for them. I'll give you an example. Last week, a Marshallese family came into Caldwell Banker, where my wife Mimi works, and she sat down with them, and they had just been approved for a mortgage for $125,000. They're very proud of themselves. They've gotten their credit scores, improved. She did a quick search. There wasn't a single property available in Northwest Arkansas for $125,000. So workforce housing affordability is a major topic amongst kind of the below medium income households. And so we have a number of recommendations that we're going to be making in the strategy, and working with others such as the Northwest Arkansas Council, the Walton Family Foundation, and others to see that many of them are implemented. So absolutely important thinking of this, the link between housing strategy and inclusion.
Thank you, Keaton. Keaton's a great one, I'll tell you. He's a great banker and a great community developer. Appreciate your comments, Keaton, there. And I think on the diversity, something McKinsey does some good reporting on that, and especially relative to women. And a lot of what I like that they share is not only should we be mentoring, but we should be sponsoring, and that means getting people, taking people with you and getting them in the right rooms or getting them in the right courses, or as early as possible, because we were all kind of sponsored. Most of us on this call probably were sponsored by someone who saw some capabilities in us, and we got to be in rooms early, and that's a lot of it. It's just getting exposure to how it all works, right? I mean, it's a broad statement, but Sydney's going to be with us here on the 22nd, and he's going to talk about white privilege, and then he says he's black privilege because he got to be sponsored, early, but there's a lot of people who didn't and haven't, and so I think that we can look at really good people that are part of that minority and lift them up by getting them sponsoring them on some basis. And I think even the STEM conversations, fourth grade, just paying attention to that, right? And trying to help lift that up with diverse people. Okay. Other thoughts or ideas? Sounds like everybody's fired up here. Also, it's noon. Our time is kind of going in. So I think if you have any other questions or want to have any other dialogue, feel free to email me, and I'll connect you with Ross. And Ross, we are really glad you're here. You're a great resource, and we are really excited about learning from you and then following and taking action on some of your great research. So we appreciate you. We look forward to being part of the do, right, everybody?
Well, thank you very much, Tim. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and engage in our mission.
We'll have you back if you will come back.
I will be back. I think there was a famous California governor that said that. I used to chair his Council of Economic Advisors.
And the final note here, something you all probably wouldn't know, but Ross Devol and Sidney Moncrief had about the same vertical leap in high school. He used to be a dunking basketball player. So he's not only cerebral, but he's got some hop, right?
Yeah, and the only difference is I was 6'1", and that jumping ability didn't do me as much good.
Well,
but
you were dunking,
I would. Well, I could. I was able to dunk at a fairly early age, but never to the extent that people like Sidney Moncrief.
Well, we're glad you didn't go too far into basketball. You wouldn't have this brilliant mind developed, right? So
it's possible, yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. Good to be with you. Appreciate everybody.